Rain soaked through Maggie Thornfield's last good blazer as she stood on the courthouse steps, clutching a manila envelope in one hand and her 11-year-old daughter's trembling fingers in the other. The documents inside represented the complete dismantling of her life at 42, a divorce settlement so one-sided it left her with nothing but 800 free sovereigns in her checking account and the clothes they wore. Behind them, the Ashworth family climbed into their sleek Mercedes, laughter carrying across the parking lot like salt in an open wound. Victoria Ashworth, Maggie's former mother-in-law, rolled down the window as the car purred to life. Some people just aren't cut out for the real world, Maggie. Maybe this will teach you some humility. The Mercedes pulled away, splashing dirty water over Maggie's already ruined shoes. Just 3 months ago, Maggie had been a marketing executive with a Tudor-style home in the suburbs and what she'd believed was a stable marriage. Now her position at her father-in-law's company had been eliminated, their joint accounts emptied, and the locks changed on the house where her possessions remained imprisoned. Maggie guided Iris into the courthouse bathroom, setting her purse on the counter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Mascara tracked down her cheeks in black rivers of defeat. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed, pale, a woman she barely recognized. "Let me help, Mommy." Iris dampened a paper towel under the faucet, her small face serious as she gently dabbed at her mother's cheeks. At 11, she already showed a caretaker's instinct far beyond her years. "You're pretty even when you cry." Maggie pulled her daughter close, inhaling the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "You're the only thing that matters now. We're going to figure this out." But how? The simple question hung between them, heavy with impossibility. The settlement had left Maggie with $827 in checking. Not enough for first and last month's rent anywhere. Not enough for more than a few nights in even the seediest motel. Their possessions remained locked in a house she no longer owned. She discovered this yesterday when she tried to retrieve Iris's school clothes, only to find the key no longer worked. Outside, the rain intensified as afternoon faded toward evening. Banking hours were nearly over. "We need to move quickly," Maggie whispered, checking her watch. Where are we going?" Iris asked as they hurried to the parking garage where Maggie's Honda Civic, the only asset in her name alone, waited. "To the bank, sweetie. We need to get our money." What little remained. The bank teller's sympathetic expression told Maggie she wasn't the first woman to stand at that counter with red-rimmed eyes and divorce papers. "I'm afraid there's a lien against your accounts, Mrs. Thornfield. We can only release the amount specified in the court order." "But that's all I have left," Maggie's voice cracked. "Everything else is gone." The teller counted out $800 in 20s and ones, sliding them across the counter. Maggie slipped the money into an inner pocket of her purse, sudden paranoia making her feel like everyone was watching, judging, waiting to take even this from her. Night fell early, hastened by storm clouds that mirrored Maggie's darkening reality. She drove aimlessly, the Civic's windshield wipers beating a metronomic rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. Iris fell asleep in the back seat, her backpack serving as a makeshift pillow. They ended up in a Walmart parking lot, one of the few places Maggie knew wouldn't hassle them for staying overnight. She reclined her seat slightly, staring at the neon store sign through the curtain of rain on the windshield. "We just need a plan," she whispered to herself, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by security patrols and the nagging fear that someone might recognize them. The former marketing executive and her daughter, now car dwellers. Morning arrived with stiff necks, rumbling stomachs, and a new kind of reality. "Breakfast?" Maggie forced brightness into her voice. They used the Walmart bathroom to freshen up, brushing teeth and changing into clean clothes from the single overnight bag Maggie had managed to pack before being locked out. In the cafe of a nearby bookstore, they shared a muffin and hot chocolate, making it last as long as possible. "Can we go home today?" Iris asked, a smudge of chocolate on her upper lip. "Not to our old home, sweetie. We're going to find a new one, an adventure just for us." "Will Dad be there?" The question pierced Maggie's heart. "No, honey, remember we talked about this? It's going to be just us for a while." The next 2 days followed the same pattern. Sleeping in the car, washing up in public restrooms, eating cheap meals, and spending hours in libraries and cafes to stay out of the relentless rain. Maggie's search for affordable housing grew increasingly desperate. Every listing required first and last month's rent plus security deposit, sums well beyond their dwindling resources. On the third night, parked behind a 24-hour diner where the night manager had kindly allowed them to stay, Maggie scrolled through Craigslist on her phone while Iris slept. Most listings were far beyond her means, but then, near midnight, a new post appeared. 1987 school bus, $3,200 OBO, runs, needs work. Perfect for conversion project. Maggie stared at the listing, her mind racing. People actually lived in converted buses. She'd seen a documentary once. The price would take nearly everything they had, but it would be a roof over their heads. She clicked on the photos. The bus was in rough shape, yellow paint faded to a sickly custard, some windows cracked, interior seats torn. But it had potential. It had wheels. It could move if they needed to escape. Before she could talk herself out of it, Maggie sent a message to the seller. Available to see tomorrow morning? Dawn painted the sky a watercolor pink as they drove to the outskirts of town. The junkyard's entrance was marked by a hand-painted sign, Frank's Auto Salvage and Sales. Rusted cars and machinery parts created a metal maze around them. Frank himself emerged from a corrugated metal office, a barrel-chested man with oil-stained coveralls and hands that looked like they'd never been fully clean. "You the bus lady?" he called out, eyeing Maggie and Iris with undisguised curiosity. Maggie nodded, suddenly self-conscious of her wrinkled clothes and the dark circles under her eyes. "Yes, I called about the school bus." Frank led them through the yard, past automotive skeletons and stacks of tires, to where the bus sat like a beached yellow whale. Up close, it was even worse than the photos, rust eating through the metal in places, graffiti scratched into the windows, the smell of mildew and old diesel fuel emanating from inside. "Bought it at auction when the school district upgraded," Frank explained, patting the hood like an old dog. "Engine's solid. Transmission's got maybe another 50,000 miles. The interior needs work, but the bones are good." Maggie climbed the steps, Iris right behind her. The inside was a time capsule of public education. Green vinyl seats torn and split, floor littered with decades of pencil stubs and paper scraps. At the very back was a tiny bathroom cubicle, barely big enough to turn around in. "It's like a giant crayon," Iris whispered, eyes wide. "Look at all the light that comes in, Mom." Indeed, despite the grime, the bus was flooded with morning sunlight streaming through the long rows of windows on both sides. "Does everything work?" Maggie asked, trying to sound knowledgeable. Frank shrugged. "Mechanically, yeah. Starts right up. Heat works. No AC, though. The previous owner started to convert it, put in that bathroom and some basic electrical, but never finished. You'd need to do the rest." "Can I see it run?" Frank climbed into the driver's seat, inserting an oversized key. The engine turned over after 2 attempts, rumbling to life with a cloud of black smoke that quickly cleared. The vibration hummed through the metal floor beneath their feet. Iris looked up at her mother, eyes bright with unexpected excitement. "We could paint it pretty colors. Make it like a house on wheels." Maggie did some quick mental calculations. The bus would cost nearly everything they had. They'd need to keep enough for food and basic supplies until she could find work. They'd have nowhere to park it legally long term. And yet, what choice did they have? "What are you planning to do with it?" Frank asked, eyes narrowing with sudden understanding. "Live in it," Maggie answered honestly, too exhausted for pretense. Something in Frank's expression softened. He turned the engine off and reached into his pocket, pulling out registration papers. "Tell you what, I'll take 3 even, and I'll throw in a full tank of diesel. That should get you started." Outside, Maggie counted out the cash, 30 $100 bills. Her hands trembled as she passed them over, watching their safety net dwindle to just $5.47. "You know how to drive this thing?" Frank asked. "I drove a delivery van in college," Maggie said, summoning confidence from somewhere deep inside. "I can handle it." Frank spent 20 minutes showing her the basics, how to adjust the oversized mirrors, the proper braking distance, how to navigate the longer wheelbase. By noon, Maggie was cautiously pulling the enormous vehicle onto the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Where are we going?" Iris asked, buckled into one of the less damaged bench seats. Somewhere we can park overnight, Maggie replied, eyes fixed on the road, hyper-aware of every car that passed, every bump in the pavement, every adjustment needed to keep the massive vehicle between the lines. They ended up behind an abandoned strip mall on the edge of town, hidden from the main road by overgrown bushes. As night fell, they spread the blankets from their emergency car kit across one of the bench seats. "It's like camping," Iris said, snuggling into the makeshift bed. "Exactly. Indoor camping." After Iris finally drifted off to sleep, Maggie sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the darkness. The enormity of what she'd done hit her in waves. She'd spent nearly everything they had on a dilapidated school bus. They had no permanent place to park it, no real plan for converting it, and no steady income. Rain began to patter against the metal roof. A leak somewhere near the back created a steady drip, drip, drip onto the floor. Maggie pulled her knees to her chest and allowed herself 5 minutes of silent tears. When those 5 minutes were up, she wiped her face and reached into her overnight bag. From its bottom, she pulled out a worn, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age and use. She opened it carefully, inhaling the scent of vanilla and cinnamon that seemed permanently infused in its pages. Her grandmother's handwriting flowed across the paper in elegant script from another era. The first page bore an inscription, "To my Maggie, the secret ingredient is starting over with love, Grandma Rosalie." Maggie traced the words with her fingertip, a connection to the past that somehow made the future seem less terrifying. Her grandmother had survived the Depression, widowhood at 32, and raised 3 children alone while running a boarding house. If Rosalie could rebuild from nothing, so could she. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, glancing back at Iris's sleeping form. The words felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The first week on the bus was a harsh education in survival. Every morning, Maggie woke to condensation dripping from the windows onto her face. The metal walls, without insulation, turned the vehicle into an icebox at night and an oven by midday. The tiny bathroom was functional but primitive, a camping toilet that needed regular emptying at gas station dumping stations, a situation so humiliating that Maggie chose to use public restrooms whenever possible. They parked in different locations each night, behind strip malls, in vacant lots, occasionally in Walmart parking lots, until security would inevitably ask them to move along. On the fourth night, Iris developed a cough, the dampness and cold taking their toll on her young body. Maggie spent their last 47 in children's cold medicine, cough drops, and soup from a nearby convenience store. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, holding Iris close as she shivered beneath their thin blankets. The sight of her daughter suffering broke something inside Maggie, releasing a fierce determination she didn't know she possessed. "I'll make this better soon." But how? With no money left and no job prospects that would pay enough for housing, they were trapped. The following morning, while Iris slept fitfully in the back of the bus, Maggie made a decision. If they were going to live in this bus, they needed to make it livable. Using the free Wi-Fi at the public library, she researched bus conversions while Iris did her homework at a nearby table. What Maggie discovered gave her hope. People all over the country were turning vehicles into tiny homes, often with minimal budgets. "We need insulation first," she murmured, making notes. "Then proper bedding, some kind of kitchen setup." That afternoon, they visited a home improvement store. Maggie couldn't afford much, but she purchased a few essential items: a roll of reflective insulation, basic tools, battery-powered LED lights, and adhesive hooks. The elderly cashier raised an eyebrow at her selections. "School project?" he asked, nodding toward Iris. "Home improvement," Maggie replied, counting out the precious bills. Back at the bus, they began work. Maggie measured and cut the reflective insulation, showing Iris how to help press it into place against the metal walls. They covered the windows with removable insulation panels at night, but kept them open during the day for light and air. "It's already warmer," Iris observed that night, her cough less frequent. Slowly, the interior began to transform. Maggie repurposed the bench seats, removing some to create floor space and arranging others into a seating area. She found discarded furniture behind an apartment complex, a small table that fit perfectly in one corner, cushions that could be cleaned and used for bedding. Iris took charge of decorating, using her colored pencils to create artwork they taped to the walls. She named their new home Sunflower because, as she explained, sunflowers always turn to face the light, no matter where they're planted. By the end of the second week, they had created a crude kitchen area using a camping stove Maggie purchased at a pawn shop. Their first home-cooked meal was simple, beans and rice with a side of canned vegetables, but it tasted like victory. "This is actually pretty good," Iris said, eating with appetite for the first time in days. Maggie smiled, watching her daughter's color return. "Tomorrow I'm going to try baking something. Grandma Rosalie's recipe book has some simple breads we can make in a Dutch oven." That night, after Iris fell asleep, Maggie paged through the recipe book again. She'd never been much of a baker, always too busy with work, too reliant on takeout and prepared foods. But now, with limited resources and time in abundance, Rosalie's recipes offered not just sustenance but comfort. She paused at a page titled "Depression Bread, No Eggs Needed." Below the ingredients list was a note in her grandmother's handwriting. "Made this weekly during the hardest times. The kneading heals your hands and heart." The next morning, Maggie mixed flour, water, salt, and a precious packet of yeast. As she worked the dough with her hands, she felt a curious calm spreading through her body. The repetitive motion of kneading became almost meditative. Push, fold, turn, repeat. By the time she shaped the dough into a small loaf and placed it in their makeshift oven, her shoulders had relaxed for the first time in weeks. The smell that filled the bus an hour later was transformative. Yeasty, warm, like home. Iris woke from a nap, her nose twitching. "What's that amazing smell?" Maggie carefully lifted the lid of the Dutch oven. "Bread, just like Grandma Rosalie used to make." They ate it still warm, spread with a thin layer of peanut butter. The simple pleasure of homemade bread lifted their spirits more than Maggie could have anticipated. As their third week in the bus began, they settled into a routine. Mornings were for cleaning and maintenance. Afternoons, Iris attended school. Maggie had managed to keep her enrolled by using a friend's address, while Maggie searched for work and baked. Evenings were for shared meals and stories. They had found a semi-permanent parking spot behind a row of storage units whose owner took pity on them and allowed them to stay for $50 a week. Money Maggie earned by cleaning the office and maintaining the grounds. Their bus home was still far from ideal. Rain found new leaks to exploit. The bathroom situation remained challenging. Laundry had to be done in sinks or at laundromats when they could afford it. But they were surviving, and Iris seemed to be adapting with the resilience only children possess. One evening, as Maggie was baking a batch of simple cinnamon rolls using one of Rosalie's recipes, a tap on the bus door startled them. An elderly man stood outside, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a cardigan despite the warm evening. "Pardon the intrusion," he said when Maggie cautiously opened the door. "I live in the apartment complex across the way." He gestured toward a brick building visible through the trees. "I couldn't help noticing you've been parked here for a while, but more importantly, I couldn't help smelling what you're baking." Maggie tensed, prepared for complaints or threats to report them. "That smell, is that genuine sourdough?" Surprised, Maggie shook her head. "Cinnamon rolls, actually, simple ones." The man leaned slightly, inhaling. "Whatever it is, it smells like proper baking. I'm Harold Whitmore. I was a pastry chef for 40 years before retiring." "Maggie Thornfield," she replied, still wary. "And this is my daughter, Iris." Harold's gaze moved from Maggie to Iris, then to the bus interior visible behind them. "You're living in this bus, aren't you?" "Temporarily, we're in transition." The euphemism tasted bitter. Harold nodded, no judgment in his pale blue eyes. "Well, Miss Thornfield, I have a proposition. I have a full kitchen that goes largely unused these days. My hands aren't what they used to be. Arthritis, you know, but I miss the smell of baking. Would you consider using my kitchen once a week in exchange for, say, some of whatever you make?" Maggie blinked in surprise. "You'd let strangers use your kitchen?" A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'm a good judge of character, Miss Thornfield, and that cinnamon smell tells me all I need to know." That Friday, Maggie and Iris climbed the stairs to Harold's second-floor apartment. The space was modest but immaculate, clearly the home of someone who valued order and precision. The kitchen, however, was anything but modest. Professional-grade appliances gleamed beneath custom lighting, and an island workspace dominated the center of the room. "You said you were a pastry chef," Maggie said, running her fingers along the cool marble countertop. "Where did you work?" "Oh, here and there," Harold replied vaguely. "Spent my last 20 years at the Ritz-Carlton before retiring. Now, what were you planning to make today?" Maggie hesitantly pulled out Rosalie's recipe book. "I thought I'd try my grandmother's sourdough bread." Harold's eyes lit up at the sight of the worn book. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hands. He turned the pages with the reverence of someone handling a sacred text, nodding occasionally at particular recipes. "Your grandmother knew what she was doing. These are solid recipes, fundamentals with personal touches." He looked up at Maggie. "You have baking in your blood, then." "I wouldn't say that," Maggie laughed. "Until a few weeks ago, I barely cooked at all. But you feel it now, don't you? The pull of it, the way the dough speaks to your hands." "Yes, actually, it's calming." Harold nodded sagely. Baking is meditation with a practical outcome. "Now let's see about this sourdough." What followed was an education. Harold didn't just let them use his kitchen, he taught. He showed Maggie how to test flour for protein content by how it felt between her fingers, demonstrated the perfect kneading technique that used the weight of her body instead of just her arms, and explained the chemistry behind the rise. "Bread is alive," he told Iris, who watched wide-eyed as he explained fermentation. "You're creating a little ecosystem, and your job is to keep it happy." When the first loaf emerged from the Harold's oven, even he looked impressed. "Your grandmother's recipe is excellent. The crust has just the right resistance." He tapped the bottom of the loaf, producing a hollow sound. "Perfect." They shared the bread with butter and honey, the three of them sitting at Harold's small dining hall as evening light slanted through the windows. "May I ask," Harold said carefully, "how you came to be living in a bus?" Maggie hesitated, then gave him the abbreviated version. The divorce, the unjust settlement, the desperation that led to their current situation. Harold listened without interruption, his expression darkening at certain details. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Life has dealt you a difficult hand," he finally said, "but you're playing it with grace." He looked at Iris, who was drawing patterns in the honey on her plate. "And you, young lady, are braver than most adults I know." "Mom says we're just camping until our real adventure starts," Iris replied with a shrug. "A positive outlook," Harold nodded, "essential for survival." He turned back to Maggie. "I'd like to make our arrangement more regular. Twice a week, perhaps. I have much to teach, if you are willing to learn." Thus began Maggie's real education in baking. Tuesdays and Fridays became sacred days when the bus was simply transportation to Harold's apartment, where flour-dusted countertops and the air smelled of yeast and sugar. Harold proved to be a demanding but patient teacher, correcting Maggie's technique with gentle persistence and praising her instincts when she got something right. "You have good hands," he told her after she mastered a particularly delicate pastry dough. "That's something that can't be taught." Iris, too, found a role, measuring ingredients with careful precision and developing an eye for when things were just right. She named their creations: sunshine rolls for the cinnamon buns with orange zest, cloud bread for the lightest, whitest loaves. One Tuesday, as Maggie was packing up their baked goods to take back to the bus, Harold disappeared into a back room. He returned carrying a glass jar containing what looked like a pale, bubbling batter. "This," he said with reverence, "is victory." "Victory?" Maggie repeated, confused. "My sourdough starter, named by my father when he created it in 1943, after receiving news that my uncle had survived the Battle of Sicily. It's been alive ever since. Nearly 80 years of continuous feeding and care." Maggie stared at the jar with new appreciation. "It's older than you are." "Indeed," Harold chuckled, "and still going strong, unlike my knees." He held out the jar. "I'd like you to take some, a small portion, to start your own legacy." "Harold, I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "Victory deserves to work with hands that appreciate it. Your bread is too good for that camping stove setup. Take it, feed it weekly, and bring me a loaf made from it next time." That night, back in the bus, Maggie placed the small jar of starter in their makeshift refrigerator with the care one might give a rare orchid. Something about possessing a living culture that had existed since World War II made her feel connected to a tradition larger than herself. As the weeks passed, Harold's lessons extended beyond technique. He taught Maggie about timing, economy of movement, and how to adapt recipes to available ingredients. But most importantly, he helped her understand that baking was more than just following instructions. It was an art form, a way of nurturing others, a small but significant way to create beauty in the world. People will forget what you say, he told her one afternoon as she shaped dinner rolls, but they never forget how your food makes them feel. The turning point came unexpectedly one morning in their 6th week of bus living. Maggie had parked overnight in a quiet corner of a strip mall parking lot. She was outside using a hose connection to fill their water containers when a police cruiser pulled up alongside the bus. Her heart sank. They'd been asked to move along before, but something about the officer's deliberate approach suggested this might be more serious. "Morning, ma'am," the officer said, removing his sunglasses. His nameplate read Sullivan. "Is this your vehicle?" "Yes, officer," Maggie replied, her mouth suddenly dry. "We're just filling water. We'll be moving along shortly." Detective Ray Sullivan studied the bus, taking in the curtained windows and the small, potted plant visible through the open door. "Are you living here?" Maggie hesitated, then nodded. Lying would only make things worse. "That's against city ordinances, I'm afraid. Can't have people camping in commercial areas." "I understand," Maggie said quickly. "We'll leave right away." The officer glanced toward the bus again, where Iris had appeared in the doorway, her expression fearful. "That's your daughter?" "Yes, Iris clutched the doorframe, watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Look, I'm not here to make trouble for you," Sullivan said, his voice softening slightly. "But I've had complaints from business owners. I can't just ignore it." "Of course," Maggie said, resignation washing over her. Another move, another day of uncertainty stretching ahead. Before the officer could respond, a heavenly smell wafted from the bus, fresh cinnamon rolls cooling on the tiny counter by the window. It was a batch Maggie had baked at Harold's the previous evening, using Rosalie's recipe enhanced with Harold's techniques. "What is that smell?" Sullivan asked, nostrils flaring. "Cinnamon rolls," Iris volunteered. "Mom made them. They're still warm." She paused, then added, "You look hungry, officer. Would you like one?" Maggie shot her daughter a warning look, but Iris had already disappeared inside, returning with a roll carefully placed on one of their few plates. "Thank you, miss," Sullivan said, accepting it with obvious surprise. He took a bite and his eyes widened. For a moment he said nothing, just chewed slowly with an expression of growing wonder. "Ma'am," he finally said, "this is extraordinary." "Family recipe," Maggie explained. "My grandmother's." "My wife used to bake," he said quietly, "before she passed away last year. I haven't tasted anything like this since." He trailed off, then seemed to collect himself. "What do you charge for these?" "Charge?" Maggie blinked. "Oh, we don't sell them. They're just for us." The officer finished the roll, brushing crumbs from his uniform. "You should, seriously." He glanced at his watch, then back at the bus. "Tell you what, there's an empty lot behind the fire station on Maple Street. City-owned, not commercial property. You could park there for a while without violating ordinances, and I'd pay $20 for a dozen of these every Friday if you can make them regularly." Maggie stared at him, not quite processing what she was hearing. "You want to buy my cinnamon rolls?" "Ma'am, I'd buy anything that tastes like this. And I know about a dozen firefighters and fellow officers who would too." After Sullivan left with directions to find them at their new parking spot the following Friday, Maggie sat in the driver's seat, stunned. "Did we just get our first customer?" Iris asked. "I think we did," Maggie replied slowly. That Friday, Maggie baked 4 dozen cinnamon rolls in Harold's kitchen. He watched with amusement as she carefully packed them into boxes salvaged from a bakery dumpster. "So a police officer tasted your rolls, and now you're in business," he summarized. "That's how it starts. One person tastes something extraordinary and tells another. Before you know it, you have a reputation." "It's just a few rolls," Maggie said, trying to temper her own excitement. "Hardly a business." "Every empire begins with a single brick, my dear." Detective Sullivan arrived at the appointed time, and his face lit up at the sight of the boxes. "These smell even better than I remember." He handed Maggie $20. The following week, Sullivan returned, this time with orders from 3 other officers and 2 firefighters. The week after that, the number doubled. Word spread through the police station and fire department about the bus lady's incredible pastries. Soon Maggie was baking 3 days a week in Harold's kitchen, producing not just cinnamon rolls, but sourdough bread, muffins, and simple cookies from Rosalie's recipe book. Iris, watching their little operation grow, had an idea. Using art supplies from the dollar store, she designed their first sign, Rosalie's Rolling Bakery, with a painted sunflower. They taped it to the bus window, and suddenly they weren't just living in a bus, they were operating from a mobile bakery. "We need a system," Harold declared one day. "Production schedule, inventory management, pricing strategy. I'm happy to help with that." With Harold's guidance, they developed a routine. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who owned a small commissary kitchen, agreed to rent them space during off hours for a percentage of sales. Harold mentored the baking. Mrs. Chen provided legitimate kitchen space. Maggie handled production, and Iris managed what she called the customer experience, with her natural charm and artistic touches. By the end of their second month of bus living, the bakery was bringing in $247 weekly, more money than they'd had since the divorce. It wasn't enough to rent an apartment, but it covered their basic needs and allowed them to improve the bus with better insulation, a more efficient cooking setup, and proper bedding. More importantly, it gave them purpose. The transformation was visible in both of them. Maggie stood straighter, smiled more easily, while Iris blossomed with the responsibility of being her mother's business partner, rather than just a dependent. One evening, as they counted the day's earnings at their little table, Iris looked up at her mother with serious eyes. "Mom, are we still in transition?" Maggie considered the question. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "You told that man we were in transition. Like, this was temporary, but I kind of like our bus now, and I really like our bakery." Maggie reached across the table, taking her daughter's small hand in hers. "The bus was supposed to be temporary, but maybe the bakery is our transition to something better, something we're building together." Iris nodded, satisfied with this answer. "I think great-grandma Rosalie would be proud of us." "I know she would," Maggie agreed, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. By their third month of operation, Rosalie's Rolling Bakery had developed a modest but devoted following. What began with Detective Sullivan's sweet tooth had expanded to include factory workers who discovered them during shift changes, office employees who drove over during lunch breaks, and families who placed weekend orders for special occasions. Maggie established a routine, arriving at Mrs. Chen's commissary kitchen at 4 o'clock a.m., baking until mid-morning, then using the bus as a mobile sales point at various locations throughout the day. They developed a schedule: Mondays near the police station, Tuesdays by the community college, Wednesdays at the farmer's market, and so on. "You're developing quite the enterprise," Harold observed one afternoon as he watched Maggie efficiently shape loaves. "Have you considered how you'll manage growth?" Maggie laughed. "Harold, we're selling baked goods from a converted school bus. I'm hardly running a corporation." Every successful business faces the same question eventually: how to meet increased demand without sacrificing quality. "You're approaching that point faster than you realize." He was right. The physical toll was becoming evident. Working 16-hour days, Maggie baked through the night while Iris slept, then handled sales during the day while Iris was at school. She'd lost weight, developed a persistent cough from flour dust, and sometimes caught herself dozing while standing up. The morning Maggie found herself nodding off at the commissary kitchen mixer, she knew something had to change. Mrs. Chen found her slumped against the counter, the machine still running. "You work too hard," the older woman scolded, helping Maggie to a chair. "I don't have a choice," Maggie replied, fighting to keep her eyes open. Mrs. Chen pursed her lips. "In my country, family business means family helps. Your daughter is old enough to learn more than just selling." The suggestion gave Maggie pause. Iris was only 11, but she was mature for her age, responsible, and eager to be involved. That weekend, Maggie began teaching Iris simple baking tasks: measuring ingredients, mixing dry components, packaging finished products. To her surprise, Iris took to it naturally, displaying an intuitive understanding of the process that reminded Maggie of Harold's comments about having baking in your blood. "The dough feels different today," Iris noted one morning as they worked side by side. "More alive." "Good observation. It's warmer in the kitchen today, so the yeast is more active." That means we need to watch the rise time carefully. These moments of teaching brought unexpected joy. For the first time since the divorce, perhaps for the first time ever, Maggie felt she was passing on something valuable to her daughter. Not just recipes or techniques, but a way of understanding the world through creating something meaningful with her hands. Their relationship deepened through this shared work. They developed a language of nods and gestures in the kitchen, anticipating each other's needs without words. Their tiny bus home, once a symbol of their fall from stability, had become the headquarters of a genuine partnership. One Tuesday evening, after a particularly successful day at the community college where they'd sold out by noon, Harold invited them to dinner at his apartment. It wasn't unusual for him to cook for them, but something about his formal invitation suggested a special occasion. When they arrived, they found his dining table set with proper linens and his best dishes. He'd prepared a simple but elegant meal: roast chicken, vegetables from his small balcony garden, and a bottle of sparkling cider for toasting. "What are we celebrating?" Maggie asked. "3 months," Harold replied, raising his glass. "3 months since you first used my kitchen. 3 months of watching you transform from a woman in crisis to a budding entrepreneur. I think that deserves recognition." They clinked glasses, Iris beaming at being included in the grown-up ritual. After dinner, Harold disappeared into his bedroom, returning with a worn leather case. He placed it reverently on the table before Maggie. "I want you to have these," he said, unzipping the case to reveal a set of professional pastry tools. Gleaming metal implements with wooden handles worn smooth from years of use. Maggie gasped. Inside were specialty spatulas, precision knives, pastry cutters, decorating tools, a complete collection that would cost hundreds of dollars. "Harold, I can't accept these. They must be worth—" "They're worth nothing sitting in my closet," he interrupted. "My hands can't manage the fine work anymore. These tools made thousands of perfect pastries at the Ritz. They deserve to keep working." Maggie ran her fingers over the tools, noting the quality and the care with which they'd been maintained. "Were these from your time at the Ritz-Carlton?" "Yes, my last position before retiring." "You never talk much about your career," Maggie observed. Harold's expression grew distant. "The hospitality industry can be complicated, demanding, rewarding when you're valued, crushing when you're not." "Weren't you valued with your talent?" "For most of my career, exceedingly so, until ownership changed. New management brought in their own people, relegated veterans like me to lesser roles. It's an old story in the industry." Something in his tone made Maggie suspect there was more to it, but she didn't press. Instead, she carefully closed the case of tools. "I'll treasure these and use them well. Thank you." Later that week, Maggie used Harold's tools for the first time, marveling at how they elevated her work. The precision knives made perfectly even cuts in dough. The specialty spatulas allowed for delicate transfers of pastry. With these professional implements, she could attempt more ambitious recipes. Working together one Saturday, Maggie, Iris, and Harold developed what would become their signature item: Iris's Sunshine Rolls. The creation combined Grandma Rosalie's cinnamon roll base with Harold's French lamination technique and Iris's creative twist, a sunflower seed and honey glaze that caramelized beautifully in the oven. The first test batch emerged golden and fragrant, the spiral pattern resembling sunflower centers. When they broke one open, the layers pulled apart in delicate sheets, revealing a perfect balance of cinnamon, butter, and sweet dough. "I think we've done it," Harold said, nodding with satisfaction. "This is distinctive, something people will remember and come back for." He was right. When they debuted Iris's Sunshine Rolls the following week, customers raved. Detective Sullivan ordered 3 dozen for the police station's monthly meeting. Word spread, and soon people were pre-ordering them days in advance. With their signature product established and a growing customer base, Rosalie's Rolling Bakery was evolving from survival mechanism to genuine business. Maggie opened a proper business checking account, obtained the necessary permits with Mrs. Chen's help, and even invested in simple branded packaging with Iris's sunflower logo. One morning, as Maggie was packaging orders, she came across a page in Rosalie's recipe book she hadn't noticed before. Between the recipes for honey cake and apple turnovers was a handwritten note. "Remember, Maggie, that baking is love made visible. When the world seems darkest, create something that nourishes others. and you will find your own spirit fed. The words brought tears to her eyes. Somehow her grandmother had left exactly the message she needed to find at exactly the right moment in her life. With renewed purpose, Maggie threw herself into expanding their offerings. Beyond breads and sweet rolls, she began creating seasonal specialties. Apple ham pies in autumn, gingerbread in winter, lavender shortbread in spring. Each recipe started with a foundation from Rosalie's book, enhanced by Harold's techniques, and finished with a creative touch from Iris. The bus itself continued to evolve alongside their business. What began as a desperate housing solution had transformed into a recognizable brand. They painted the exterior a cheerful yellow with Iris's sunflowers decorating the sides. Inside, they optimized the space for both living and business with clever storage solutions and multi-purpose furniture. Their parking situation stabilized as well. Detective Sullivan arranged for them to use a corner of the police department's auxiliary lot, a gesture that provided security and legitimacy. In exchange, Maggie ensured the station's break room never lacked fresh pastries. As spring turned to summer, an unexpected pattern emerged in Rosalie's recipe book. Maggie noticed that certain recipes contained extra notes in the margins, not just baking tips, but life wisdom. These notes seemed to appear exactly when she needed guidance, when she worried about their financial future. Prosperity comes to those who create value for others. Focus on quality and abundance will follow. When she felt overwhelmed by the workload, rest is part of the recipe. Without it, everything falls flat. When she doubted her abilities, the master baker was once a beginner who burned the bread. Persistence is the yeast that makes us rise. It's almost like she knew, Maggie told Harold one afternoon as they worked side by side. Like she left these messages for me to find when I needed them most. Perhaps she did, Harold replied, his eyes twinkling. The wisest among us plant seeds of wisdom for future harvests they'll never see. With the business growing steadily, Maggie began looking ahead. They were making enough now to cover their basic needs, maintain the bus, and even save a small amount each week. But the question of their long-term future remained. We can't live in the bus forever, she acknowledged to Harold one evening, especially as Iris gets older. She needs stability, a permanent address for high school eventually, a normal teenage life. What are you considering? I don't know. Maybe eventually saving enough for a small apartment or finding a permanent location for the bakery with living space above it, like Mrs. Chen has. Both worthy goals, Harold nodded. Though I must say there's nothing normal about your daughter. She's extraordinary, as is what you two have built together. It was true, despite their unconventional living situation, or perhaps because of it, Iris was thriving in ways Maggie hadn't anticipated. Her grades remained excellent. She'd developed confidence, creativity, and a work ethic remarkable for her age. The other children at school knew about the bus now, but instead of being a source of shame, it had become something of a status symbol. Iris was the girl whose mom owns the famous rolling bakery. Yet challenges remained. Summer brought sweltering heat that made the bus uncomfortable despite their insulation efforts. Business permits and health regulations grew increasingly complex as their operation expanded. And always there was the physical toll of pre-dawn baking, followed by long days of sales and deliveries. The most unexpected challenge came from Iris herself. One evening as they were cleaning up after dinner, she asked a question that caught Maggie off guard. Mom, do you ever miss your old job? Maggie paused, dishcloth in hand. Sometimes. Parts of it. Why do you ask? Iris shrugged, avoiding her mother's eyes. I was just thinking. You went to college and had this big career, and now you're baking all day. Is this really what you want to do forever? The question struck at Maggie's deepest insecurities. Was this sustainable? Was she shortchanging her daughter's future by embracing this unexpected path? Honestly, I don't know if this is forever, she answered carefully. But right now, it's exactly what I want to be doing. I've discovered something I love, something that connects me to Grandma Rosalie, and something I can share with you. That makes it more meaningful than any corporate job I ever had. Iris's face brightened. Good, because I was thinking we should expand. Expand? Yeah, we're turning away orders because we can't make enough in time. And people keep asking if we have a website or if we ship. I think we're ready to grow. Maggie stared at her daughter, this child who spoke of business expansion as casually as most kids discussed video games. Have you been talking to Harold about this? A little, Iris admitted. He says every successful business reaches decision points where they choose to stay small or scale up. Maggie made a mental note to discuss with Harold the appropriateness of filling her 11-year-old's head with business strategy. Yet she couldn't deny the swell of pride at Iris's engagement with their enterprise. Growing means more investment, more risk, Maggie explained. We'd need more equipment, possibly employees, definitely more space than Mrs. Chen's kitchen can provide. I know, Iris said, with the confidence of someone who had thought this through. But I've been doing research at the library. There are small business loans and grants for women-owned businesses. And we already have loyal customers and a unique story. That's more than most startups have. Startups? Have you been reading business magazines again? Maybe, Iris grinned. But I'm right, aren't I? You're not wrong, Maggie conceded, amazed at how far they'd come from those desperate first days in the Walmart parking lot. That night, after Iris was asleep, Maggie sat in the driver's seat of the bus, her thinking spot, and considered their future. The business was successful by any measure, especially given its humble beginnings. They had regular customers, reliable income, and a product people genuinely loved. But Iris was right about the limitations. The commissary kitchen restricted their production capacity. The bus, while perfect as a mobile sales point, couldn't accommodate growth. And without a proper business address, they faced challenges with everything from mail delivery to school registration. Maybe it was time to consider the next step, not just for the business, but for their lives. As Maggie gazed out at the stars visible above the police lot, a sense of possibility replaced the fear that had been her constant companion since the divorce. They were no longer just surviving, they were building something that might carry them into a future brighter than any she could have imagined on those courthouse steps 3 months ago. The rain-soaked woman clutching divorce papers and her daughter's hand had become someone new, someone stronger, more capable, more aligned with her own values than she'd ever been in her marketing career or her marriage. That transformation was the most unexpected ingredient in this recipe for starting over. The secret ingredient is starting over with love, Maggie whispered, echoing her grandmother's words. For the first time, she truly understood what Rosalie had meant. Sometimes life's most painful endings could lead to the most beautiful beginnings. If you had the courage to keep facing toward the light, just like the sunflowers on their bus. The morning sun hadn't yet broken over the horizon when Maggie's alarm jolted her awake. Her body ached from yesterday's 16-hour workday, muscles protesting as she slid from the narrow bed without waking Iris. The summer heat had already built inside the bus, despite their insulation efforts. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she changed quickly in the dim light, gathering her baking supplies for another pre-dawn start at Mrs. Chen's kitchen. By 4:30 a.m., Maggie was elbow-deep in dough, the rhythmic sound of the commercial mixer providing the soundtrack to her exhaustion. The cough she'd developed from constant flour exposure tickled her throat. She stifled it, not wanting to disturb the silence of the early morning hours. Numbers swam through her mind as she calculated the day's orders. 35 sunshine rolls for Detective Sullivan's department, 20 loaves of sourdough for the Wednesday farmers market, and a dozen specialty pastries for a new corporate client. The mixer's steady hum grew distant as Maggie's eyes grew heavy. She leaned against the counter for just a moment, promising herself a brief rest. The room tilted, the fluorescent lights blurred, and suddenly the floor seemed to rush toward her face. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Mrs. Chen's weathered face swam into focus, eyes sharp with concern beneath her silver hair. "Third time this week, not good." "I'm fine," Maggie insisted, pulling herself upright despite the room's alarming tendency to spin. "Just need more coffee." Mrs. Chen shook her head, leading Maggie firmly to a chair. "No more coffee, more sleep, more help." She gestured to the massive pile of orders waiting to be filled. "Business growing too fast for one person. Even strong person breaks eventually." Maggie pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to clear the fog of exhaustion. The business had grown exponentially in the past month. What started as a few dozen cinnamon rolls for local police had ballooned into an operation that served offices, markets, and individual customers throughout the city. Success had arrived with its own set of problems, primarily that she couldn't keep pace with demand while maintaining quality. In my country, family business means family helps, Mrs. Chen continued, pouring a cup of her special ginger tea instead of the coffee Maggie craved. Your daughter, smart girl. Teach her more. The suggestion lingered in Maggie's mind during the long drive back to the bus, where Iris was just waking up for school. She watched her daughter prepare for the day with practiced efficiency, heating water on their small stove for instant oatmeal, packing her backpack, selecting clothes from their limited wardrobe with the care typical of a preteen. How many orders today? Iris asked, spooning honey into her breakfast. Too many, Maggie admitted, rubbing her temples where a headache pulsed. Mrs. Chen thinks I should teach you more about the baking side, not just selling. Iris's face brightened, spoon frozen midway to her mouth. Really? I could help with the actual baking? That would be amazing. The eagerness in her daughter's voice surprised Maggie. She'd been sheltering Iris from the more demanding aspects of their business, trying to preserve some semblance of normal childhood. But perhaps in doing so, she'd been denying her daughter meaningful involvement in something that had become central to both their lives. That weekend, they began a new phase of their partnership. Maggie started Iris with simple tasks, measuring ingredients, mixing dry components, learning the proper temperatures for different types of dough. To her amazement, Iris absorbed the lessons with remarkable aptitude, showing an intuitive feel for baking that Maggie herself had developed only after months of practice. The dough feels different today, Iris observed one morning, her small fingers testing the elasticity of their sourdough. Bouncier, more alive. Maggie nodded, impressed by her daughter's sensitivity. That's because the kitchen is warmer than usual. The yeast becomes more active with heat, which changes how quickly the dough rises and how it feels under your hands. These teaching moments created a deeper bond between them. Beyond the practical assistance Iris provided, Maggie found profound satisfaction in passing on skills that connected 3 generations of women in their family, from Rosalie to herself and now to Iris. Their productivity improved dramatically with 2 sets of hands working in tandem. Maggie could focus on the more complex aspects of production, while Iris handled prep work and finishing touches. They developed a shorthand language in the kitchen, a raised eyebrow that meant check the oven, a nod toward the cooling rack signaling it was time to package, a particular way of clearing the throat that warned of a difficult customer approaching the bus window. Yet despite these improvements, new challenges emerged. As their reputation grew, so did scrutiny. One Tuesday morning, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit appeared at Mrs. Chen's kitchen door, clipboard in hand. Health inspector, she announced without preamble. Routine check following consumer inquiries about business permits for mobile food vendors. Maggie's stomach plummeted as she realized their precarious position. They had basic permits through Mrs. Chen's kitchen, but nothing comprehensive enough to cover their expanding operation. The inspector methodically examined every corner of their workspace, noting infractions with clinical detachment, improper storage of certain ingredients, inadequate labeling, questions about temperature control during transport to their mobile location. You'll receive formal notification of required corrections, she explained, handing Maggie a preliminary report filled with highlighted violations. You have 30 days to address these issues before reinspection. Failure to comply could result in closure of operations. The violations would cost hundreds of dollars to address, money they didn't have in reserve. Beyond the financial burden loomed a more fundamental problem. Their business existed in a gray area between established restaurant and informal mobile vendor. The regulations weren't designed for their unique situation. Mrs. Chen found Maggie staring at the report, shoulders slumped in defeat. The older woman studied the document through narrowed eyes. My nephew works in city planning department. He knows these codes better than inspectors. I will call him. True to her word, Mrs. Chen arranged a meeting with her nephew Michael, a soft-spoken man whose methodical approach to regulations proved invaluable. He guided Maggie through the labyrinth of permits, suggesting specific classifications that would legitimize their operation without requiring impossible standards meant for full-scale restaurants. The key is proper categorization, he explained, highlighting sections of the municipal code. You're neither a traditional food truck nor a bakery with fixed premises. But there are provisions for limited production vendors that might fit your model. With Michael's guidance and Mrs. Chen's fierce advocacy, they navigated the regulatory challenges, emerging with proper permits and a clearer understanding of the legal landscape they operated within. The experience cost them nearly 2 weeks of reduced production and $750 in fees and equipment upgrades. A significant setback, but one that ultimately strengthened their foundation. The regulatory hurdles had barely been cleared when a new threat emerged. Iris noticed it first, during their Wednesday session at the farmer's market. "Mom, look," she whispered, pointing toward the entrance where a sleek white van had parked. Crescent City Bakery proclaimed the professional signage, alongside pictures of pastries that looked remarkably similar to their own offerings. Maggie watched with growing concern as the competing bakery set up a polished display featuring cinnamon rolls, artisanal breads, and most troublingly, a specialty item called Sunrise Swirls that bore an unmistakable resemblance to their signature sunshine rolls. Throughout the day, Maggie observed their new competitors' tactics: slightly lower prices, professionally printed menus, staff in matching uniforms, and not-so-subtle comments to customers about the certified kitchen where their products were made, an implied criticism of Rosalie's more humble operation. The impact was immediate. Their sales dropped by nearly 30% that day, with several regular customers trying the competitors' offerings out of curiosity. By week's end, Crescent City had established a pattern of parking near their regular locations, effectively siphoning business through proximity and presentation. "They're copying everything we do," Iris fumed as they counted their diminished earnings. "Those Sunrise Swirls are just knockoffs of our recipe." Maggie examined one of the competitors' pastries they'd purchased for comparison. The appearance was similar, but the flavor lacked the depth and character of their own creation. "They've copied the form but missed the substance," she noted. "No lamination technique in the dough, lower quality honey in the glaze, and they're using artificial flavoring instead of real cinnamon." "But customers can't tell just by looking," Iris countered, "and they have those fancy boxes and uniforms, so people assume they're better." The competition forced them to reevaluate their approach. They couldn't match Crescent City's polished presentation or lower their prices without sacrificing quality, but they had advantages the corporate bakery couldn't replicate: personal connections with customers, adaptability, and the authentic story behind their business. They leveraged these strengths by introducing personal touches that highlighted their unique identity. Iris designed small cards telling the story of Rosalie's recipe book in Victory, the 80-year-old sourdough starter. They included these with each purchase, creating a narrative connection that mass-produced competitors couldn't match. Harold, upon hearing about the competition, suggested transparency as a competitive edge. "Show them how it's made," he advised. "The big operations hide their process because it's full of shortcuts and preservatives. You have nothing to hide." Following his advice, they reorganized their bus to create a small demonstration space visible through the service window. Customers could watch Iris shape rolls or Maggie score loaves before baking, tangible proof of their handcrafted approach. The strategy gradually worked. While they didn't recapture all their lost business, loyal customers returned, often bringing friends to experience the authentic artisan bakery on wheels. Their sales stabilized, though the episode left Maggie with a lingering anxiety about their vulnerability to larger competitors. One evening, as they cleaned up after a particularly busy day, Harold arrived at the bus with unusual solemnity. He carried a small photo album Maggie hadn't seen before. "I need to tell you something," he began, settling into one of their bench seats with the careful movements of his arthritic joints. "Something I should have mentioned earlier." He opened the album to reveal a younger version of himself in professional chef's whites, standing proudly in a restaurant kitchen. The sign behind him was instantly recognizable to Maggie: Ashworth's Fine Dining. "You worked at Ashworth's?" The revelation landed like a physical blow. "My former in-law's restaurant." Harold nodded grimly. 12 years as head pastry chef. Victoria's father valued traditional techniques and quality ingredients. I built their dessert program from nothing into something truly special." His fingers traced the edge of the photograph. When old Mr. Ashworth passed away and your former father-in-law took control, everything changed. New management wanted flashier presentations, cheaper ingredients, shortcuts that compromised quality but increased profit margins. The pieces clicked into place. Harold's vague references into being undervalued, his immediate connection to Maggie's situation, his investment in their success. When I refused to lower my standards, he continued, they gradually pushed me out, reduced my hours, hired younger pastry chefs willing to follow the new direction, eventually eliminated my position altogether. 3 years before retirement age after giving them my best years. Maggie sat in stunned silence, processing this unexpected connection. Why didn't you tell me? At first, I wasn't certain you were connected to those Ashworths. Then once I realized it seemed like reopening old wounds would serve no purpose. Harold closed the album with a gentle finality. But after hearing about this new competition, I realized you should know the full context of my interest in your success. My support isn't entirely altruistic. There's an element of justified vindication in helping you build something authentic while their restaurant struggles. The revelation cast their relationship in a new light, not diminishing Harold's generosity, but adding complexity to his motives. In some small way, Maggie's success represented redemption for his unfair dismissal. She wasn't sure how to feel about this additional dimension, but understood his need for closure in a situation where justice had been denied. Their conversation was interrupted by the distinctive rumble of the bus's engine turning over, a sound that shouldn't be possible with the keys safely in Maggie's pocket. She rushed outside to find Detective Sullivan standing beside the vehicle, his expression grave as the engine produced a tortured, metallic grinding before dying completely. Been making that noise for the last 10 minutes, Sullivan explained. Tried to start it to move it for street cleaning, but something's seriously wrong. A mechanic friend of Sullivan's arrived the next morning to deliver the verdict. Catastrophic alternator failure with collateral damage to the electrical system. The repair would cost approximately $1,800, money they simply didn't have in reserve despite their improved financial situation. Can it wait? Maggie asked, desperation edging her voice. Maybe just a temporary fix to keep it running until we save more? The mechanic shook his head, pointing to the corroded components. This is already the second stage of failure. First stage probably happened weeks ago with warning signs you might not have recognized. Now it's complete burnout. Without a full replacement, this bus isn't going anywhere. The timing couldn't have been worse. They had outstanding orders for the next 3 days, regular customers expecting them at established locations, and no way to transport their products or themselves. Beyond the immediate business crisis loomed the terrifying reality that the bus was their home. Without it functioning, they had no shelter. Panic rose in Maggie's throat as she considered their options. Their savings contained just $1,100, earmarked for winter preparations and potential expansion. A conventional bank loan was impossible with her credit still damaged from the divorce. Predatory lenders would charge interest rates that would sink them deeper into financial quicksand. We could do a crowdfunding campaign, Iris suggested that evening as they huddled in the stationary bus. I read about a family who raised money for their food truck repairs online. That means telling everyone about our situation, Maggie countered. Admitting we're not just running a business from this bus, we're living in it. Despite her misgivings, their desperation forced Maggie to consider options she would have previously rejected. She reluctantly agreed to let Sullivan share their predicament with fellow officers who had become regular customers. Meanwhile, they moved baking operations entirely to Mrs. Chen's kitchen, with Sullivan and another officer volunteering to transport their products to regular customers. Word spread quickly through their community of supporters. 3 days after the breakdown, Sullivan appeared at Mrs. Chen's kitchen with news that transformed their crisis. The department took up a collection, he announced, holding an envelope. Not just officers, dispatchers, administrators, even some of the firefighters, plus the storage facility owner, where you used to park, kicked in, and Mrs. Chen rallied the other vendors who use her kitchen. The envelope contained $1,500 in cash, not quite enough for the full repair, but close. And my mechanic buddy says he'll do the labor at cost if we cover parts, Sullivan added. Says your roles got him through his divorce last year, and he owes you one. The community's response overwhelmed Maggie with its generosity, but also forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their precarious situation affected more people than just herself and Iris. They had become integrated into a web of relationships, creating mutual dependence that came with both support and responsibility. Their success or failure now had ripple effects beyond their bus home. The alternator crisis, while financially devastating, provided an unexpected opportunity. With the bus in the shop for repairs, they could make improvements they'd been postponing. Using their remaining savings and working alongside Sullivan and Harold, they transformed the interior with more efficient storage solutions, proper countertops for food preparation, and solar panels for basic electricity needs. They painted the exterior a vibrant yellow with Iris's sunflower design prominently featured. The visual transformation from converted school bus to Rosalie's rolling bakery was striking. No longer a makeshift solution, but a purposeful mobile business with distinctive character. By the time the mechanical repairs were completed, the bus had evolved into a more functional space for both business and living. The crisis that had threatened to destroy them had instead forced an evolution that strengthened their foundation. Their enhanced appearance attracted new attention. A local newspaper ran a small feature on the bus bakery that praised their resilience and quality. The article brought a wave of curious customers, expanding their client base beyond the police officers and regular farmers, market visitors who had sustained them initially. Among these new customers was a food writer from a regional magazine who appeared one Wednesday morning, notebook in hand and camera slung around his neck. He observed their operation with professional detachment, sampled several items, and asked pointed questions about their methods and ingredients. Maggie felt optimistic about the interaction until his review was published 2 weeks later. "Heartwarming story overshadows mediocre execution," read the headline. The article acknowledged their unique circumstances but criticized inconsistencies in their products, questioning whether emotional appeal rather than culinary merit drove their popularity. While one applauds the entrepreneurial spirit behind Rosalie's Rolling Bakery, serious food consumers would be better served at established bakeries with proper facilities and quality control. The review hit Maggie like a physical blow, attacking the very foundation of their enterprise, the quality of their food. She'd endured financial hardship, regulatory challenges, and direct competition, but this assault on her craftsmanship cut deeper than any previous setback. "He doesn't know what he's talking about," Iris insisted, tossing the magazine aside. "Our customers keep coming back because our food is good, not because they feel sorry for us." Harold took a more measured approach after reading the piece. "There's useful feedback buried in the criticism," he noted, pointing to specific comments about texture variation between batches. "These are legitimate technical issues we can address. The consistency problems likely stem from the temperature fluctuations in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, depending on time of day. We can adjust our process to account for that." Despite their attempts to focus on constructive aspects, the review affected business. Several corporate clients quietly discontinued their orders. New customers who might have tried them based on word of mouth now approached with skepticism, asking pointed questions about techniques and ingredients that revealed they'd read the critique. Determined to prove their worth through quality rather than sentiment, Maggie threw herself into refinement. She adjusted recipes to account for environmental variables, implemented more rigorous testing procedures, and documented every step of production to ensure consistency. Harold's professional tools became essential for this precision work, allowing for exact measurements and uniform results regardless of external conditions. The tide began to turn when an unexpected visitor appeared at their window one Tuesday morning. Victoria Ashworth herself, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored suit that likely cost more than 3 months of Maggie's current income. Behind her stood Robert, Maggie's ex-husband, looking uncomfortable in the morning heat. "Margaret," Victoria greeted her with the formal name Maggie had abandoned years ago. "What an unexpected enterprise you've created." Iris stiffened beside Maggie, recognizing the visitors who had caused their downfall. "We're sold out of sunshine rolls already," she stated coldly. "Perhaps you should have come earlier." Victoria ignored the child's hostility, her gaze traveling over the transformed bus with undisguised curiosity. "People at the club keep mentioning that bakery woman. Imagine our surprise when we realized they were talking about you. Robert shifted his weight, eyes never quite meeting Maggie's. We thought we should see for ourselves what all the fuss is about. The encounter vibrated with unspoken tension. These people had orchestrated Maggie's professional destruction, emptied their joint accounts, and left her homeless with a child to support. Yet here they stood, driven by curiosity, or perhaps something else, at the window of the business she had built from nothing. Would you like to try something? Maggie asked, surprising herself with the offer. We still have sourdough and cranberry walnut bread available. Victoria hesitated before nodding. The sourdough, I suppose. Maggie carefully sliced a piece from their signature loaf, made with Victory's 80-year-old starter and baked to Harold's exacting standards. Victoria accepted it with the reluctance of someone being handed a suspicious package. She broke off a small piece, raised it to her lips, and took a delicate bite. For a moment, her carefully maintained expression slipped, revealing genuine surprise and followed by unmistakable appreciation. This is quite remarkable, she admitted quietly. The crust, the tang, its authentic, artisanal quality. My grandmother's recipe, Maggie explained, with refinements from a former Ritz-Carlton pastry chef who mentors us. Something flickered across Victoria's face at the mention of high-end culinary credentials, a recalibration of her assumptions about Maggie's operation. You have professional training now? Not formally, but I have good teachers and good instincts. Robert, who had been silently watching this exchange, finally spoke. The restaurant has been struggling, he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. Dad's health isn't good, and the new chef isn't working out. We've been losing customers to trendier places. The true purpose of their visit suddenly became clear. We might be able to help each other, Victoria suggested smoothly. You could supply our restaurant with these pastries, or perhaps even open a location inside it. The Ashworth name still carries weight in this town. The audacity of their proposal left Maggie momentarily speechless. These people who had taken everything from her now wanted to capitalize on her success. There was a time when such validation from the Ashworths would have meant everything to her. Now it felt hollow, a transparent attempt to salvage their failing business by exploiting her hard-won skills. I appreciate the offer, Maggie said carefully, but we have other plans for expansion. Iris and I have built this independently, and we want to maintain control of our brand and our future. Victoria's smile tightened imperceptibly. I understand. Still, the offer stands if you reconsider. It would be mutually beneficial. As they turned to leave, Victoria paused. You've created something impressive, Margaret. I wouldn't have thought you had it in you. The backhanded compliment lingered in the air after they departed. Maggie wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or insulted by this grudging recognition of her abilities. The encounter left her with conflicting emotions, satisfaction at proving her worth to people who had dismissed her, yet discomfort at still craving their approval on some level. You did the right thing turning them down, Harold said later when she recounted the visit. They'd take control and compromise your quality, just as they did with my pastry program. Maggie nodded, but found herself wondering if she'd rejected the Ashworth's offer out of business wisdom or personal pride. Either way, the encounter marked a psychological turning point. She no longer defined herself in opposition to her former life, but as the creator of something valuable on its own terms. The visit from the Ashworths coincided with increasing media attention. Local television stations began featuring them in human interest segments. Social media buzz grew around their unique story and distinctive products. They introduced seasonal specialties that created anticipation among their growing customer base. Apple hand pies made with local fruit in autumn, cardamom spice cookies during holiday seasons, lavender shortbread when spring arrived. Their reputation seemed secure until an alarming phone call shattered their confidence. A customer claimed to have become ill after eating one of their cranberry walnut loaves, threatening to report them to health authorities for food safety violations. The accusation struck at Maggie's deepest fears. They had always maintained rigorous cleanliness standards, but their unconventional production methods created vulnerabilities a traditional bakery didn't face. If an investigation found valid concerns, they could lose everything: their business license, their livelihood, their home. Sullivan helped arrange an immediate meeting with the county health department, before formal complaints could be filed. The health official who interviewed them was professional but stern, explaining that they would need to document their food safety protocols, submit samples for testing, and potentially face a mandatory shutdown during investigation. All our ingredients come from certified suppliers, Maggie explained, showing receipts and packaging. We maintain temperature logs and follow serve-safe guidelines for storage and handling. Your processes may be sound, the official noted, but perception matters as much as reality in food safety concerns. One public accusation can damage a reputation beyond repair, regardless of findings. The investigation consumed their attention for nearly 2 weeks. They continued production under heightened scrutiny, documenting every step with photographs and temperature readings. Chen vouched for their practices, as did other vendors who shared her kitchen space. The final report cleared them completely, finding no evidence of contamination or unsafe practices. The customer's illness was attributed to a pre-existing condition unrelated to their food. While the official vindication should have brought relief, the incident left lasting damage. Social media whispers continued despite their exoneration. Several customers admitted they were taking a break from purchasing until they felt more confident. The cloud of suspicion, however unfounded, lingered over their operation like the faint smell of something burning, imperceptible to some but concerning to others. Maggie implemented even more stringent safety measures in response, purchasing commercial-grade sanitizing equipment and creating detailed production logs that exceeded regulatory requirements. The additional procedures added hours to their already demanding schedule, but seemed necessary to rebuild trust. The experience forced them to confront the fragility of their business model. One false accusation had nearly destroyed them. While they had weathered this crisis, the next might prove fatal without stronger foundations and reserves. "We need to think bigger," Harold advised during one of their planning sessions. "You've proven the concept works. Now you need infrastructure that can withstand challenges, financial reserves, proper insurance, possibly employees beyond family." The suggestion of expansion felt both exhilarating and terrifying. They had created something successful against impossible odds. But scaling up would require capital they didn't have and expertise beyond their current knowledge. One afternoon, as Maggie was completing paperwork for their monthly health inspection, a stylishly dressed woman in her 30s approached the bus window, expensive camera in hand. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you the famous bus bakery everyone's talking about?" "That depends who's asking," Maggie replied, wary after their recent experience with critics. "Tilly Chen," the woman explained, presenting a business card that read, "Tastemaker Tilly," alongside social media handles. "I run a regional food blog with about 50,000 followers. I'm doing a piece on unconventional food businesses and would love to feature yours." Maggie vaguely recognized the name from customer conversations. Several people had mentioned finding them through that food blog with the great photography. "I appreciate the interest," she began cautiously, "but we're very small. Just me and my daughter, really." Tilly's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what makes your story compelling. The single mom who started a bakery from a converted school bus? That's pure gold." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Plus, I've tried your sunshine rolls, and they're legitimately amazing. People need to know about you." Before Maggie could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Iris about Sullivan needing to move the bus. She apologized for the interruption and promised to consider the offer, uncertain whether more publicity would help or harm their precarious balance. That evening, she discussed the blogger's proposal with Iris and Harold. "After that food critics hit piece, I'm not sure we should risk more exposure," Maggie admitted. "What if she also decides we're mediocre and broadcasts that to her followers?" "But she already likes our food," Iris countered. "She called the sunshine rolls amazing before she even asked to feature us. That's different from some snobby critic who probably decided we weren't fancy enough before he even tasted anything." Harold considered both perspectives before offering his assessment. "In my experience, there are two types of food writers: those who judge based on preconceived notions of what's proper, and those who genuinely celebrate discovery and authenticity. This young woman sounds like the latter." After careful deliberation, Maggie agreed to the feature. Tilly arrived at Mrs. Chen's kitchen at 3:00 a.m. the following day, camera ready and energy undimmed by the early hour. She documented every aspect of their process, from Maggie's first interaction with Victory's sourdough starter to Iris packaging the final products. Her questions revealed genuine curiosity about techniques, ingredients, and the stories behind specific recipes. "This sourdough starter is 80 years old," she exclaimed when Maggie explained Victory's origins. "That's incredible history in every bite." Tilly's enthusiasm seemed authentic, her appreciation of their craftsmanship informed by real culinary knowledge. She sampled each product thoughtfully, taking notes and occasionally closing her eyes to better focus on flavors. "These are exceptional," she declared after trying Iris's sunshine rolls. "The lamination technique is perfect. You get these distinct layers that pull apart, but they're not dry like most commercial pastries. And that honey sunflower seed glaze is genius. It caramelizes beautifully without becoming cloying." Throughout the day, Tilly captured hundreds of photographs. Close-ups of Maggie's flour-dusted hands shaping dough, Iris carefully packaging sunshine rolls, the two of them serving customers from the bus window. She rode along on their delivery route, interviewed Harold about his mentorship, and spoke with several regular customers about why they returned week after week. "This is even better than I anticipated," Tilly confessed as they wrapped up the marathon documentation session. "You're not just selling pastries, you're selling resilience." A mother-daughter team who rebuilt from nothing. By day's end, Maggie was exhausted but cautiously optimistic about the feature. Tilly had approached their story with respect and genuine appreciation for their craft. "When will this be published?" Maggie asked as the blogger packed up her equipment. "I'll need a few days to edit photos and write it up," Tilly replied. "Probably by this weekend. I'll send you a link when it's live." 3 days later, Maggie's phone began buzzing incessantly during morning prep. Texts, emails, and social media notifications poured in faster than she could process them. "Mom," Iris called from the bus's tiny living area where she'd been checking their online presence before school. "You need to see this." Tilly's blog post had gone live at 6:00 a.m. with the headline, "I found the best pastry in America, and it's made in a school bus." The article featured stunning photos of their baking process, the colorful bus, Iris's artwork, and mouth-watering close-ups of their products. But it was the text that took Maggie's breath away. "Some food experiences transcend taste. They tell a story, connect to our humanity, and remind us that extraordinary things can emerge from difficult circumstances." Rosalie's Rolling Bakery is such an experience. Housed in a converted school bus and operated by a mother-daughter team who lost everything in a divorce just months ago, this mobile bakery creates pastries that rival those I've tasted in Paris and Vienna. The piece continued with detailed descriptions of their signature items, particularly praising the sunshine rolls as transcendent and worth driving across state lines for. It concluded by emphasizing the palpable love that goes into every creation and providing their schedule of locations. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. By the time they parked at their usual Wednesday farmers market spot, a line had already formed, stretching beyond their designated space to the market entrance. People clutched phones displaying Tilly's article, some having driven from neighboring cities after seeing the post. They sold out within an hour, every roll, loaf, and cookie gone before most regular market vendors had finished setting up. Back at the commissary kitchen, Mrs. Chen greeted them with a knowing smile. "I see the internet has found you. My nephew showed me the article. Very good photos." "We're completely sold out," Maggie said, still dazed by the morning's events. "We need to make more for tomorrow's location, but I don't even know if we have enough ingredients." Mrs. Chen nodded. "I called my supplier. We get what you need, but my kitchen will be too small soon. You need your own place now." The pattern continued throughout the week. Wherever they parked the bus, customers were already waiting. Their social media accounts, previously followed by a handful of local supporters, gained thousands of followers daily. Local news stations picked up the story, then regional outlets, then national morning shows. The Bus Bakery, as people had begun calling them, became a feel-good human interest story that resonated with audiences across the country. The attention was overwhelming. Their phone rang constantly with catering requests, shipping inquiries, and interview requests. Customers drove from 3 states away to try their pastries. "This is insane," Maggie told Harold one evening as they tallied the day's record-breaking sales. We can't keep up with demand. We're baking 20 hours a day and still turning people away. Harold nodded, his expression both pleased and concerned. Success can be as challenging as failure, just in different ways. What you're experiencing is growing pains. It's more like growing agony, Maggie sighed, rubbing her flour-covered hands over her face. We need more help, more space, more equipment. But I'm afraid to commit to expansion when this could all be temporary, just a viral moment that fades. Is that what your instincts tell you? Harold asked, eyes sharp beneath his silver brows. Maggie considered the question honestly. No, she admitted. The response isn't just about novelty or a good story. People genuinely love what we're making. The quality is real. Then perhaps it's time to consider those options the business advisor discussed: loans, investors, a permanent location. Before Maggie could respond, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it, another media request likely, but something made her answer. Is this Margaret Thornfield of Rosalie's Rolling Bakery? A polished male voice inquired. Yes, speaking. My name is Daniel Reynolds. I'm a producer with Food Network. We're interested in featuring your story in an upcoming special on unconventional food businesses. Would you be open to discussing this opportunity? Maggie's hand tightened around the phone. Food Network? The television channel? The very same, Reynolds confirmed, a smile evident in his voice. Your story has caught fire, Ms. Thornfield. We'd like to be part of telling it. After scheduling a preliminary call with the producer, Maggie turned to Harold, stunned by this latest development. Food Network wants to feature us. This is getting out of hand. Harold's eyes crinkled with quiet satisfaction. Out of hand, perhaps, or exactly as it should be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Daniel Reynolds from Food Network crouched beside the bus, directing his cameraman toward a more dramatic angle. Get that light hitting the sunflower logo, he instructed, gesturing toward the freshly painted side panel. I want viewers to feel the contrast between this vibrant business and its humble origins. Maggie observed from the doorway, still processing the surreal transformation of their lives. Just 3 weeks had passed since Tilly's blog post ignited the firestorm of attention. Now a professional television crew documented their every move, from pre-dawn baking rituals to the moment they opened their service window to the perpetual line of customers. The previous day's filming had captured their production process at Mrs. Chen's kitchen. Today focused on the mobile operation itself, the converted school bus that had evolved from desperate shelter to recognizable brand. Tomorrow would feature customer interviews and background segments on their journey from homelessness to viral sensation. We need a few more shots of you and Iris working together at the window, Reynolds called out. The mother-daughter dynamic is gold for our demographic. Iris appeared beside Maggie, her expression torn between excitement and wariness. At 11, she understood the significance of national television exposure, but remained protective of their carefully constructed life. Do we have to do that thing where we pretend to be surprised by customers again? It feels fake. Maggie squeezed her daughter's shoulder. No more staged reactions. I told them we'll only do what feels authentic. The boundary setting had caused initial friction with the production team, who were accustomed to reality television's malleable relationship with actual reality. But Reynolds had ultimately respected their limits, recognizing that their genuine story held greater appeal than any manufactured drama. Between camera setups, Reynolds approached with news that would dramatically alter their trajectory. I mentioned your operation to a colleague in New York last night, he began, checking his notes. James Harrington, major restaurateur, owns about a dozen successful establishments in Brooklyn. He saw your segment on our production schedule and asked about you specifically. The name triggered immediate recognition. Even living in their bubble of survival and recent success, Maggie had heard of Harrington's empire, a collection of critically acclaimed eateries known for innovative concepts and impeccable execution. He's flying in tomorrow to observe our filming, Reynolds continued. Says he's interested in discussing potential partnership opportunities, maybe bringing Rosalie's Rolling Bakery to Brooklyn. The words hung in the air like an impossible mirage. New York, Brooklyn, names that belong to a different universe than their converted school bus and commissary kitchen rental. Why would someone like Harrington be interested in us? Maggie asked, suspicion threading through her initial excitement. The Ashworth's self-serving offer remained fresh in her memory. Reynolds seemed to anticipate her concern. Harrington's known for identifying authentic concepts with expansion potential. His business model focuses on preserving the creative vision while providing infrastructure for growth. He handed her a business card with Harrington's contact information. Do your research. Call his other partners if you want references. He's legitimate. That evening, Maggie did exactly that, contacting two restaurants in Harrington's portfolio whose owners spoke candidly about their experiences. Both confirmed that he maintained their creative control while handling the business aspects they lacked expertise in. One chef, initially as skeptical as Maggie, described him as the rare investor who understands that preserving authenticity is good business, not just good ethics. Harold listened to her findings with careful attention, occasionally jotting notes as she shared details of Harrington's track record. The restaurant industry is built on broken promises and exploited talent, he cautioned. But there are exceptions. If these references are accurate, this could be the opportunity you've been searching for. Brooklyn, Iris breathed, testing the word like an exotic flavor. Do you think they have good schools there? The question pierced Maggie's heart. Her daughter's first thought wasn't about leaving friends or familiar surroundings, but about educational opportunities. Despite their unconventional circumstance, Iris had maintained exceptional grades, completing homework by battery-powered light in their tiny bus home, never complaining about the limitations their situation imposed on normal childhood experiences. Some of the best in the country, Maggie assured her, wondering if they were getting ahead of themselves by even considering such a dramatic relocation. James Harrington arrived the following afternoon. Noon, a distinguished man in his 50s whose casual attire couldn't disguise its expensive tailoring. He observed the filming with professional detachment, occasionally making notes on a small, leather-bound pad. During a break in production, he introduced himself directly to Maggie rather than going through Reynolds or his assistants. "I've been watching you work all morning," he began, extending his hand, "and I'm impressed. More importantly, I've tasted your creations, and I'm beyond impressed." His straightforward approach disarmed Maggie's practiced wariness. After exchanging pleasantries, they arranged to meet after filming concluded, selecting a quiet corner of a nearby cafe where Harold joined them while Iris finished her schoolwork at a separate table. "I'll be direct," Harrington began once they were settled. "I own several food establishments in New York, each with a specific focus and identity. I've been looking to add an artisanal bakery to my portfolio, but I wanted something special. Not just another pretentious pastry shop selling $9 croissants." He paused to sip his coffee before continuing, his assessment measured and precise. "What you've created has a soul. It has a genuine story and exceptional quality. I'd like to bring Rosalie's to Brooklyn, a proper brick-and-mortar location with living space above it for you and Iris. I'd provide the startup capital and location in exchange for partnership." Maggie's pulse quickened. Partnership meaning what, exactly? Harrington outlined his proposal without the slick persuasion tactics she'd grown to recognize from her marketing days. "I provide the space, renovation costs, equipment, and my business infrastructure. You provide the recipes, techniques, and brand identity. We split profits 60-40, 60 to you as the creative force, 40 to me as the investor. You maintain complete creative control of the menu and operations." The offer seemed too good to be true. "Why us? There must be hundreds of bakeries looking for investment." A smile creased the corners of Harrington's eyes. "Thousands, actually, but none with your particular magic. The combination of traditional recipes and modern presentation, the mother-daughter story, the authenticity of how you built this from nothing. It's compelling, and compelling stories sell pastries." He leaned forward, his expression earnest beneath his professional demeanor. "Plus, those sunshine rolls are legitimately the best pastry I've had in 5 years, and I eat at Michelin-starred restaurants weekly." Iris, who had been quietly listening from her corner, voiced the question foremost in Maggie's mind. "Would we have to leave our bus behind?" Harrington considered the question with appropriate seriousness. "Not necessarily. The bus has become part of your brand identity. I imagine it could serve as a mobile unit for catering, special events, maybe weekend markets. But you'd have the stability of a permanent location as your primary operation. After promising to send a formal proposal for review, Harrington left them to discuss the possibility amongst themselves. Maggie immediately turned to Harold, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, carefully observing the restaurateur's mannerisms and checking his statements against his extensive industry knowledge. His reputation is solid, Harold confirmed. I made some calls after I heard he was interested. Former colleagues who still work in New York hospitality speak highly of him. He's known for letting his partners maintain their unique vision rather than corporatizing everything. The prospect of relocating across the country generated a tangle of emotions Maggie struggled to untangle. But New York, she whispered, the magnitude of such a change settling over her. It's so far. We'd be leaving everything, our customers, our routine. She looked meaningfully at Harold, the unspoken concern hanging between them. Our friends. Harold reached across the table, patting her hand with gentle reassurance. My dear, this business has outgrown this town. You've created something special that deserves a bigger stage. His eyes twinkled with mischief beneath his serious expression. Besides, I've always wanted an excuse to visit New York again. My joints may protest, but I could manage a trip now and then to check on your lamination technique. The decision wasn't made lightly. Over the next several weeks, Maggie consulted with a small business attorney who scrutinized Harrington's proposal for hidden pitfalls. She conducted due diligence on his other properties, examining financial statements and partnership agreements he provided with transparent willingness. She even arranged video calls with several of his current business partners who spoke candidly about both challenges and benefits of working with him. Parallel to this professional investigation ran the more intimate decision-making process about uprooting their fragile stability. Maggie and Iris had lengthy conversations about what such a move would mean for both of them. You'd be changing schools, leaving your friends, Maggie reminded her daughter one evening as they sat on the bus's roof, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, a ritual they'd established during their months of bus living. Iris considered this with the serious expression that made her seem older than her years. But we're good at starting over now, aren't we? And I could FaceTime with my friends here? She hugged her knees to her chest, voice growing quieter. Plus, think about all the art museums in New York. I could see real Van Goghs and Monets. The simplicity of her daughter's acceptance humbled Maggie. While she agonized over logistics and long-term implications, Iris saw the adventure and opportunity. Perhaps that clarity of vision was what they needed most. The ability to recognize that the bus had given them shelter when they needed it most, had transformed into a business that sustained them, and might now carry them to an even more remarkable chapter. Harrington's proposed contract, when it arrived, exceeded their expectations in its fairness. It included provisions Maggie hadn't thought to request: health insurance coverage, education stipends for Iris, protected creative control clauses that couldn't be overridden by financial considerations, and well-defined exit strategies should the partnership prove unsatisfactory to either party. The 3-month preparation period began with a flurry of activity. Harold helped them scale recipes for commercial production, calculating precise measurements for larger batches while preserving the handcrafted quality that defined their products. They studied New York food service regulations, developed systems for increased volume, and planned how to maintain their artisanal standards in a more substantial operation. Mrs. Chen hosted a goodbye dinner, presenting Maggie with a set of traditional Chinese kitchen deities to protect their new bakery. My grandmother brought these from China, she explained, wrapping the delicate figurines in red cloth. Said they watch over those who feed others with honest hands. Detective Sullivan arranged a police escort for the first leg of their journey, 5 patrol cars with lights flashing to accompany their departure from the city that had witnessed their desperate beginning and unexpected rise. The gesture, unnecessary but deeply meaningful, brought tears to Maggie's eyes as she hugged the officer who had become their first customer and steadfast advocate. You showed this department what resilience looks like, Sullivan told her, voice gruff with emotion. That's worth more than all the cinnamon rolls in the world. The most difficult farewell came with Harold. The night before their departure, he invited them to his apartment for one final lesson. The kitchen gleamed with familiar warmth, the scene of countless hours of instruction and shared discovery. But tonight, instead of flour and mixing bowls, his kitchen table held a worn leather portfolio Maggie had never seen before. I want to show you something I've never shared, Harold said, unclasping the portfolio to reveal yellowed newspaper clippings, photographs, and menu cards documenting his long career. He pointed to a faded photograph of a younger Harold in chef's whites, standing proudly beside an elaborate dessert display. This is from my time at Ashworth's. The revelation startled Maggie. You worked at my former in-laws restaurant. For 12 years, I was head pastry chef there before the Ritz. His fingers traced the image with mingled pride and regret. Victoria's father, the original owner, valued my work. But when he passed and Victoria's husband took over, he shrugged, the gesture conveying decades of accumulated disappointment. They wanted flashier desserts, less traditional technique. When I refused to compromise quality for trendiness, they pushed me out. Why didn't you tell me before? Maggie asked, understanding now the depth of his investment in their success. Harold's gaze met hers with quiet dignity. At first, I wasn't sure if you were related to those Ashworths. Then when I realized you were, it seemed like reopening old wounds would serve no purpose. A slight smile softened his expression. Besides, our connection grew beyond that shared history. The revelation transformed Maggie's understanding of their relationship. Harold hadn't just been a kind neighbor or a baking mentor. He'd recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone else the Ashworths had discarded, whose talent they had failed to value. His support contained an element of vindication neither of them had acknowledged. Before they departed, Harold presented her with a small wooden box. Inside lay a single perfect sunflower seed nestled in velvet. Plant this at your new bakery, he instructed, closing her fingers around the box. Let it remind you of where you started and how far you've grown. The morning of their departure dawned clear and bright. The bus, freshly painted with their logo and Brooklyn bound, added beneath it, was loaded with essential equipment, Harold's professional tools, Victory the sourdough starter secured in a special temperature-controlled container, and Grandma Rosalie's recipe book wrapped in protective covering. A small crowd gathered to see them off. Mrs. Chen, Detective Sullivan, and several officers, regular customers who had supported them from the beginning, and Harold, standing slightly apart, his eyes suspiciously bright despite his composed expression. Ready for our biggest adventure yet? Maggie asked Iris as they climbed aboard. Her daughter nodded, excitement and apprehension mingling in her expression. Ready. The journey to New York became a pilgrimage of sorts. They took their time, stopping at landmarks along the way, with Iris documenting their trip through drawings and photographs in a journal she titled The Sunflower's Journey East. They visited bakeries in each state they passed through, sampling local specialties and exchanging techniques with fellow bakers, curious about the viral sensation traveling through their communities. Maggie was surprised by how many people recognized them from Tilly's blog post or the Food Network feature that had aired just before their departure. "You're the bus bakery people," became a common greeting at gas stations and rest stops, often followed by requests for photographs with the distinctive yellow vehicle. As they approached New York City, the reality of what they were doing began to sink in. The traffic grew denser, the buildings taller, the pace faster. Iris pressed her face to the window, marveling at the skyline appearing in the distance. "It's like in the movies," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Navigating the bus through Brooklyn streets proved challenging, but with GPS and the occasional help from amused locals pointing them toward less congested routes, they finally reached their destination, the former laundromat Harrington had purchased for their new establishment. The space was better than they had imagined from photos and video calls. High ceilings, large windows facing the street, ample room for both production and customer seating. The apartment above was small but well-designed, with 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and windows that caught the morning light, perfect for early rising bakers. Renovations began immediately. Harrington had architects and contractors ready, but he insisted that Maggie and Iris have final approval on all design decisions. They chose warm colors, natural wood, and a layout that allowed customers to watch the baking process through a large interior window. The bus found a permanent parking spot in a small courtyard behind the bakery, visible from the street, a colorful beacon that connected their past to their present. In a quiet moment during the construction chaos, Maggie planted Harold's sunflower seed in a pot placed near the front window where it would receive morning light. Do you think it will grow here? Iris asked, helping to water the freshly turned soil. I do, Maggie replied, sensing the question contained meanings beyond the literal. Different soil can still nourish the same seed. The grand opening of Rosalie's Rising was scheduled for a crisp October morning, 6 months after Tilly's blog post had changed their lives forever. They chose the name deliberately, a tribute to Grandma Rosalie, to the rising of bread dough, and to their own rise from adversity. The night before, Maggie couldn't sleep. She stood at the apartment window looking down at their creation, the beautifully renovated bakery with its hand-painted sign, the bus parked proudly alongside, the neighborhood they were just beginning to know. Iris appeared beside her in pajamas, voice soft with wonder. Are we home now? Maggie put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, feeling the solid warmth of her presence. I think we are. Morning brought clear skies and a line of customers extending 6 blocks, a mix of locals curious about the new establishment, food enthusiasts who had followed their journey online, journalists covering the opening, and supporters who had traveled to witness this milestone. Harold had flown in for the occasion, refusing to miss what he called the culmination of our little baking education. As they prepared for the doors to open, Maggie spotted a familiar figure near the end of the line, Victoria Ashworth, alone and attempting to look inconspicuous behind large sunglasses. Excusing herself from the pre-opening preparations, Maggie walked the length of the line to where her former mother-in-law waited. Victoria straightened as Maggie approached, removing her sunglasses with deliberate casualness. Margaret, congratulations on your opening. Thank you for coming, Maggie replied, genuinely surprised by her presence. I had business in the city, Victoria explained, the practiced excuse failing to conceal her purposeful visit. Then with visible effort she added, but yes, I wanted to see this, to see what you've built. The admission, difficult for a woman who rarely acknowledged others' accomplishments, represented a significant concession. Maggie considered her options before making an impulsive offer. Would you like to come in early, avoid the wait? Victoria blinked in surprise at the unexpected kindness. That's very thoughtful, but no, I'll wait my turn like everyone else. She hesitated, then added quietly, I was wrong about you, Margaret. I'm sorry. The apology, unexpected and clearly difficult for Victoria to offer, was a gift Maggie hadn't known she needed. It closed a chapter, allowing her to fully step into this new life without the shadow of old resentments. Thank you, she said simply, the words encompassing both the apology and Victoria's acknowledgement of her success. Back inside, Harrington was making a brief speech to the assembled staff, the 12 people they now employed, including a young assistant baker Maggie was mentoring, 2 counter staff, and a delivery driver for their growing wholesale accounts. Today marks the beginning of something special, he concluded, gesturing toward the gleaming kitchen and welcoming dining area. Rosalie's isn't just another bakery, it's a reminder that with skill, determination, and heart, it's possible to create beauty from whatever life gives you. He turned toward Maggie and Iris with genuine respect. I'll now turn things over to the true creative force behind everything you'll taste today. Maggie stepped forward, Iris beside her, suddenly aware of the distance they had traveled from those desperate days sleeping in their car. She looked at the eager faces of their team, at Harold beaming proudly from the back, at the crowds visible through the windows, people who had stayed up before dawn to experience what they had created. 3 months ago, my daughter and I were living in a school bus because we had nowhere else to go, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion welling inside her. That bus became our home, then our business, and finally our ticket to this moment. We learned that starting over isn't the end. It's often the beginning of something more beautiful than you could have imagined. She glanced at Iris, who nodded encouragingly. Today we invite you to taste what resilience feels like, what family recipes passed through generations taste like, what beginning, again with hope and flour-covered hands, can create. At precisely 7 o'clock a.m., they unlocked the doors. The first customers entered to the scent of fresh bread and Victory sourdough, the sight of gleaming display cases filled with sunshine rolls and a dozen other specialties, and the warmth of a space created with love. By the end of opening day, they had served over 500 customers, received write-ups in local food blogs, and accumulated a waiting list for special orders. Victoria had indeed waited her turn, ordered quietly, tasted their signature items, and left with a box of pastries and a new respect visible in her eyes. That night, exhausted but exhilarated, Maggie and Iris sat on the floor of their new apartment, surrounded by congratulatory flowers and cards. "We did it, Mom," Iris said, leaning against Maggie's shoulder. "We did," Maggie agreed, stroking her daughter's hair. "And this is just the beginning." In the months that followed, Rosalie's Rising became everything they had hoped and more. Within weeks, they were featured in the New York Times food section. 2 months later, Bon Appetit included their sunshine rolls in a feature on the city's best pastries. By Christmas, they had a 3-week waiting list for custom orders. The bus operated at weekend farmers markets, maintaining their mobile routes, while the brick-and-mortar location handled daily operations and wholesale accounts. They employed 15 people, creating a small community united by their love of quality and craftsmanship. Iris, now 12, had her own section in the bakery where she created art-inspired pastries for special occasions, edible interpretations of famous paintings that earned her a profile in a teen magazine. She thrived in her new school, made friends quickly, and talked about studying culinary arts and business when she grew up. Harold visited quarterly, staying in their guest room and providing what he called quality control inspections, but what was really an excuse to spend time with the family he'd adopted. Each visit, he brought a new addition to Maggie's professional tool collection, items from his own career that he insisted belonged in working hands. The sunflower seed he had given them sprouted, grew, and bloomed, an enormous golden flower that customers considered a good luck charm. When it finally dropped its seeds, Iris carefully collected them, planting some in window boxes and packaging others as gifts for special customers. 1 year after their arrival in Brooklyn, Maggie sat in their apartment above the bakery, writing in a journal while Iris slept nearby. She opened Grandma Rosalie's recipe book, now displayed under glass in the bakery during the day, but brought upstairs each night, too precious to leave behind. The inscription on the first page remained her touchstone. "To my Maggie, the secret ingredient is starting over with love. Grandma Rosalie." Maggie traced the familiar words, reflecting on how literally they had proven true. Starting over had indeed been the secret ingredient in their journey, the catalyst that transformed loss into creation, desperation into purpose, a broken life into something whole and beautiful. Morning would come early, as it always did for bakers. She would rise before dawn, descend to the kitchen where victory waited to be fed, and begin another day of creating sustenance and beauty with her hands. Iris would join her after sunrise, adding her artistic touches and infectious enthusiasm. Below their apartment, the bakery stood ready. Outside, their painted bus remained a colorful reminder of their journey. The path from that rainy courthouse day to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. It had twisted through parking lots and borrowed kitchens, through mechanical breakdowns and health inspections, through criticism and viral fame. Yet each turn, each obstacle, each unexpected opportunity had led them precisely where they needed to be. As Maggie closed the recipe book, her thoughts returned to something Harold had told her months ago, when their future seemed most uncertain. The most beautiful gardens grow not in straight rows, but in winding paths where the light finds unexpected places to shine. Those words captured the essence of their journey. Light had found them in the darkest moments, in a school bus that became a home, in a chance encounter with a retired pastry chef, in a police officer's appreciation of homemade cinnamon rolls. That light had guided them forward, one step at a time, until they found themselves not just surviving, but truly living. Maggie closed her journal and prepared for bed, listening to the familiar sounds of Brooklyn through the partially open window. So different from the quiet nights in their bus, yet comforting in their own way. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, new recipes to perfect. But it would also bring the continued unfolding of the life they had built from nothing but determination, skill, and love. As she drifted towards sleep, Maggie's thoughts returned to her grandmother's wisdom. Rosalie had understood something essential about life's deepest challenges, that they could break you or transform you, depending not on their severity, but on how you face them. The secret wasn't avoiding hardship, but finding the courage to begin again after devastation. To knead hope into each new day like yeast into dough, trusting in the mysterious alchemy that turns the simplest ingredients into something nourishing and beautiful. The bus that once represented their lowest point had carried them to unexpected heights. The skills born of necessity had blossomed into artistry. The desperate solution to homelessness had become the cornerstone of their identity and success. In losing everything, they had found something more valuable: their true capacity for resilience, creativity, and connection. Outside their window, Brooklyn continued its nighttime rhythm. Inside, mother and daughter slept peacefully beneath the same roof that sheltered their dreams and ambitions. Below them, the bakery waited for morning light. And somewhere, Maggie liked to imagine, Grandma Rosalie was smiling at what her recipes and wisdom had helped create, a story of rising in every sense of the word.